plumbing problems in your house can cause a lot of damage. If you've had to deal with a plumbing problem, who would you call?
If you call a professional, you have to be sure the person has the right credentials and experience to deal with your problem.
If the plumber who shows up is a rookie, rather than fixing your problem, he might make it even worse because he simply doesn't have enough experience. Similarly, friends, neighbors, and coworkers who have not experienced significant grief might want to be helpful, but sometimes they actually add to your suffering.
And what about those times when you do schedule a professional plumber for a repair and they don't show up? Unfortunately, friends might not show up when you're expecting them to.
It's not hard to understand why friends or coworkers might say inappropriate things or not even show up when you're grieving. Most people usually try to avoid the topics of death and grief. And so most of us are poorly prepared to talk about these things when someone we know loses a loved one.
I had the garage door open one day, and the neighbor was passing by, and I was getting in a brand new car that I had bought for Nadine. And my neighbor walked by and said to me, "Oh, you still have your wife's car? Are you keeping it for sentimental reasons? Why don't you get rid of it?" And I'm like, how could a person say that, knowing that, she passed away? I had another person mention that, you ought to have her free reign now. You're in the house all by yourself. You can do what you want. If you want to run around with no socks on, you can do that. If you don't want to clean up the dishes, you can do that. You can basically just do whatever you want to. And I replied to him, I would love for her to complain about me cleaning up the dishes. I would love for her to say, hey, could you wash the clothes? Clean the toilets. I would give all the money in the world.
I was talking to one of my relatives after the funeral, and she said, well, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And she was trying to be encouraging. But how I heard that was, well, my dad wasn't strong enough and it's killed him. So you're not really comforting me in this moment.
A lot of those people that would call, hey, how you doing? How y'all doing? I didn't hear from anymore. People that had been close to the both of us, began to avoid me to a certain degree.
People at church loved me and were good to me. But so many times, we just don't understand what we haven't been through. They had Wednesday night suppers. And I thought, I just really want to go tonight because I just need fellowship so badly. And I got there, I was about the second one through the line. And I sat down at a table very close to the end of the buffet line. Well, people kept coming in, and they would get to the end of the line, and they would never look my way. They'd go by my table and sit down somewhere else. And so often I would just say, well, I guess I'm invisible.
As discouraging as this might be, there are ways to deal with this problem and even strengthen some of your relationships in the process. That's what we'll talk about today. Welcome to Grief Share.
In session 4, we talked about the value of help from other people as you deal with your grief. We'd like to reaffirm that again. Friends can be a tremendous source of encouragement and strength when you feel like you're at your weakest.
But in today's session, we also want to add another possibility, that your friends haven't shown up like you thought they would, or they don't say the comforting things that you'd love to hear from them. It's more common than you might expect.
There's this great part of our community that was just super supportive. But then there were some folks who really didn't know what to do with us. You're healthy, you can have another baby. And, and I had to remind them, we're not grieving because we can't have children, it's because we lost a child. And so we do hold out that hope that God might grant us a child in the future, but we are actually grieving a real child we lost.
One of my best friends from high school reached out to this friend, and he didn't get back to me. He didn't respond for months, actually. And he told me later, Al, I'm sorry, I should have reached out or responded to you. I just didn't know what to say.
In the midst of our grief, we should expect people to say stupid things. I think we should expect people not to know what to do with us. Because people really want to help us, but they don't know.
I have received many comments since my husband died that have had a pinch to them. I had a very well-meaning lady tell me that God was my husband now. I've had to shield my children from difficult comments that they have received. Comments like, it's gonna be really hard without your dad. My kids know that. They don't need anyone to tell them. They need people who speak hope into their lives. And I've had folks who just ghosted. They don't call anymore. They say nothing. And the silence speaks too.
I remember Dave and I were friends with a couple who we told them that I had had multiple miscarriages and that Paul had died. And the guy said to Dave, don't take this wrong, but my wife and I prayed before we had each of our children, and they were all born healthy. It was like, okay, how are we supposed to take that?
Now we'll turn to how you might respond to reactions to your loss from people around you. And let's begin with responding to friends who are very uncomfortable with your grief. They want to say something to you rather than simply ignore your loss, but they fumble in their efforts.
I had one sweet, sweet friend of mine who came by my house and brought a meal for me. This was right after Dan passed, and she hugged me and she said, darling, you're so beautiful and so young. God will send you someone else down the road. And I just remember thinking, wow, that's not really what I needed to hear at that point. But I understood where she was coming from. She was meaning well. She was trying to encourage me, even though that probably wasn't the right thing to say at the time. But people are going to be and say insensitive things, and guess what? Probably you have as well. So you got to give grace.
Some people like to cook for you. Some people will maybe want to come and help you with yard work. Some people just don't know what to do, and you should expect those people to. Some people will try to say something to help. They're just not very graceful with their words. Expect that.
I gave a call to a good friend because I just needed to vent and pour my heart out, and the conversation fell flat. She wanted to fix everything, and it was frustrating because we'd always been really close, and I left that phone call wondering, what happened? Have I lost her too? And I realized after a lot of thought, maybe what I had asked her to do wasn't part of her gifting. She'd always been a person in my life who was a fix-it person. And here I'd asked her to carry the emotional weight of my loss. Maybe that was just something she wasn't equipped well to do. I'm really grateful for her in my life because I've got a million things now that need fixing, and she's my go-to person. And I've found other people who are not so good at giving me solutions to problems, but who will sit and let me cry with them or just feel lonely with them, and they don't feel like they have to give the right answers. And I realized that I need both of those people in my life. There's no one perfect person to walk with me through grief.
Scott had to help his daughter know how to respond to unhelpful comments after the death of her mother.
One thing I told Alexandria was, people are going to say things and they might not sound so good, or again, they might sound trite or kind of cliche or kind of light in dealing with your heaviness. We often don't have the greatest words for people at such times, and just understand it for what it is. People are trying to support you. They're trying to reach out in love. Accept it for what it is. That's their way of showing you they support you. And if it's not ultimately supportive to you, understand there's a very good intent behind it. You should just graciously receive it.
Although you always should try to be gracious in responding to your comforters, you may have to be very direct with some of them who are just too zealous in their efforts to help you. Norm Wright has good advice for what to do in these situations.
There will be certain people in your life that if you were to give them a label, you would call them the invaders. They're not necessarily from outer space, but they're from the neighborhood or the church. And they come in and they tell you they know exactly what you need. They tell you exactly what to do. They barge in the door with food and they say, now this is what you've got to eat, and I'm going to take care of this, and I'm going to take you out next week, and on. And you feel overwhelmed. And if you tend to be a person who is more of a people pleaser, or you're more reserved, you're quieter, it's difficult to be assertive, you just really agonize inside. And this is where it might even be helpful to jot this person a note, because it might be too difficult to confront them, face to face, but you could jot them a note and say, gee, thank you so much for your offer. At the present time, I am doing all right, and I will let you know what I need and when I need it, and thank you for your cooperation and for your prayers. Sometimes even letting people know, we've got enough food now. It's like we had a lot of people during my wife's treatment bring us food, and they learned to ask, is there anything that you're allergic to? And there's one food that we'd say, yes, Joyce is allergic to pork, and we've developed an allergy to lasagna because we've had so much of it that came in that, I love lasagna, but enough is enough, folks.
When professionals come to your home to make repairs, sometimes they propose unneeded services or confusing advice.
Sometimes your friends will share unwanted or unhelpful advice too.
So you might graciously listen to it, but then carefully evaluate its usefulness for your situation.
People may always feel like they need to be telling you what to do or how to handle something, and they don't always know the best thing to do or the right thing to do, but welcome that. Allow people to enter in, allow people to give what they have to offer. And just like anything else, you pray through, you think through, and figure out what's beneficial and what can be helpful for you.
People would say things like, you shouldn't date again until this point, or you should do this thing with your daughters, or you should, keep an environment for your daughters where things don't change, stability, like all these things. You can't control that. All you can control is being generous in how you receive it, which for me oftentimes now is just by saying thank you and then making the choice that I feel like is best for my family.
Sometimes all you can say is, thank you, I'll need to think about that for a while. But then you have to say to the Lord, Lord, that was too much for now. But help me to file it, and then please bring it out to me if there is a point where you want me to think about it.
You may want to simply invite people to be present with you, to come alongside you as you grieve.
After our third loss, Brianna, I had gotten home and I woke up one morning and remember it just feeling darker than normal. And I called a dear friend of ours. I said, Jen, it's dark and I don't know if it's okay for me to be by myself today. And she said, I'm on my way. I'll never forget that, just having her there just made a difference. We didn't talk. I didn't have to talk. She didn't have to feel like she had to talk, but she just had her eyes on me that day, and that was a big deal.
As our friends came to our house, what was so helpful about it is first they showed up. I think we undervalue showing up. You know, if my son is screaming at night because he's scared of the dark, I show up. My sheer presence is calming. And so in a larger storm in life, I mean, just showing up is so important.
I had several of my friends from my youth group actually spent the night with me at our home for 4 or 5 nights after my brother died. They don't necessarily know what to do, but by God's grace, I'm grateful for the fact that they knew enough just to be present.
A very common question you'll be asked is, how are you doing?
However, some people who ask that question really won't want a detailed response. Others will want more. So you might not know for sure how to respond.
Here are some thoughts about what might be appropriate to do in these situations.
When you're in grief, people who will walk up to you and ask you how you are, the first thing out of your mouth is, "I'm fine," because you really think that they don't actually want to hear what's in your heart. They're just trying to be nice. And so the first thing you say is, "I'm fine." At that point, they say, "Wow, she's doing great. I don't have to worry about her anymore." But I've learned it's a whole lot better to be honest with them about how you feel.
What I would recommend is to say something like, if it's a bad day, saying, "I'm having a struggle today. I'm really pretty sad, yet, you know, you don't have to talk about it. I just want you to know that it's painful, you know. If you want to ask more questions, I'm happy to talk with you, but thank you for asking. I appreciate your concern," or something to that effect.
So I would have quick responses like, "Well, the kids and I, we're doing the best we can. It's a struggle, and it's going to take time." But then when there was someone that, really wanted to know, then I would say, "It's really tough. I'm really having a hard time. I'm really missing him, and there's just so much work to be done."
Help them understand that grief isn't something that you can just sort of sweep under the rug or suddenly take a pill or do something else to get rid of the pain, but that it's a long, tedious, hard journey.
So I learned that when someone walked up to me and said, "Ellie, I'm sorry for your loss. How are you doing?" I say, "You know what? Today's been really a bad day. Not doing so good today. I really could use a hug." Or I might say, "I could really use your prayers. Would you put me on your prayer list, because I'm having some pretty bad days right now." And I think it's at that point where people who have never lost a loved one begin to understand how they can help and minister to you rather than avoiding you. So we need to be honest about how we feel.
You also need to be careful about your expectations for those friends who do show concern for you.
They too have responsibilities in their lives that might limit their availability to help you as time goes by.
I think the word help means different things to different people. And so I think it's super important to figure out what your expectations are. A lot of hurt comes to us when we expect one thing and get another. And we just need to adjust our expectations.
There are some things to watch out for. There are a number of widowed people who kind of expect that now people would help them, and that expectation doesn't end really quickly. Like particularly with people who have adult kids who kind of expect them to come around, and it's one thing for kids to help adult kids to help initially, but long term, I would really encourage widowed people to start figuring out, how am I going to do this for the long term? You don't have to do it all yourself, but you have to figure out how to get it done without just expecting somebody to do it for you for the rest of your life.
Some people will come and try to fix you. They'll come and try to tell you what you need to do. They're going to come up with every solution that they've ever tried or worked or heard from or saw online. Some people, if you've lost a spouse, are going to try to connect you up with somebody so that you can have a date, and you're not ready to date, and you just need to be able to say, thank you, but no thank you. And I think that you should expect this too. I think you should expect that a few weeks in, people's lives will go back to normal. At the beginning, everybody wanted to talk to you about your loss. but eventually people won't talk as much about it anymore. As a matter of fact, some people will become really uncomfortable with it. They'll think you should have moved on. And that's not always true. Don't be mean to them. Just don't talk to them about that. Go talk to other people who want to hear, who ask questions, and be discerning about who you allow to be a part of that journey in the weeks and the months to come.
Sometimes we can add to the burden we feel in these situations.
That happens, for example, when we fall into the trap of too easily accepting our friends' expectations for us.
I remember years ago when we went through a house fire, a couple months had gone by and somebody said to me, Julie, it's been a couple of months. You're in a rental house. Like, you guys are getting everything back in order. Why do you think you're still struggling? That question hit me like a ton of bricks. And I didn't even know how to respond to it. Because here was an expectation, or at least I heard it as an expectation, that I shouldn't be grieving. I shouldn't be struggling. What was there to struggle about anymore? And I had to wrestle through in that moment where it was an expectation being placed on me, or was I failing to do something right? And I realized that sometimes people just won't understand our suffering. And that wasn't because I was doing anything wrong. It's because they had nothing to orient themselves to. They had no way of understanding my experience.
There will be those people who press us into moving past our grief, getting over it. I remember about 1.5 years into the loss of our son, one of Nan's best friends came to her and said, I want the old Nan back. Well, the old Nan's gone. This is the new Nan. This is who I am. I can't just go back to being that person. Wish I could, but we can't. By the way, that friendship came to an end. It's unfortunate, but we have to be the ones to choose who we spend our time with.
And there's a complexity of the grief that people often don't understand. If they see you hurting, they think you're not trusting God. And if you're not hurting, then you must be trusting God. Instead of saying, can't both grief and trust coexist? Can't I hurt and still have hope? So if I'm living for the expectation of others, then I start to perform. When I see people in church, I try to put on a smile instead of just being who I am, being honest, that I've got to live for the approval of God, not the applause of man, not the expectations of what people around me think, because I'm honoring God in the way I'm choosing to move forward.
A few months after Connor died, an expert in the grief process was traveling through the city where I lived and did a free workshop. He said something that got my attention. He said, when you're going through grief, you can divide up the people in your life into thirds. A third of the people in your world probably are not going to be helpful at all. They just don't know how to be around suffering. Another third of the people in your world are sometimes helpful and sometimes irritating. But there's another third he called the therapeutic third. He said, these are people, I would say they have the gift of mercy. They're naturally good listeners. They're not afraid of pain. They'll sit with you. They'll listen, they'll talk, they'll share, they'll bring up the person's name, they'll engage you, and they're therapeutic for you.
After my wife Lisa passed away, we had one couple friend that were unbelievably important to me. I mean, literally, they would pick me up 2 times a week. We would go do something social, and they truly wanted to know how I was doing, and I would just lay it out there. I'm not sleeping, I'm not eating, I'm overeating, can't get out of bed. Most people don't want to hear that, but the people that I trusted and truly cared about me, I think, did want to know, and they want to know how they could help.
My stepdaughter and her husband, our 2 granddaughters, have made several trips from Ohio to help me work on the house, clean out things at the house, and which really touches my heart that they love their stepdad and their grandpa that much that they would do that. So, and I've had friends that said, hey, whatever you need, if you get to a point where you have to carry something, you need a hand, let me know. And my brother lives fairly close, and he regularly comes over and he said, "What can we do today? Let's work on something." So the support from friends and family has been amazing, and I'm so grateful to God for that.
Some people that knew me, that cared about me, that didn't give up on me, that kind of forced themselves back into my life even though I tried to keep them out. Those people that didn't give up on me. One of my pastors in particular, I owe him my life. Literally, I owe him my life because he never gave up on me. Some people might say, well, that's a pastor's job. But this gentleman went far beyond what a pastor's job is. I was a lost cause. I really was a lost cause. He would come visit me at the hospital multiple times, spending time with me. Even when I told him that I was a lost cause, that there are other people so much more worthy than me. I think that might have made him even more determined.
I often compare our support system to a tree. There's leaves that are just beautiful, and they're there for a season. But when the season changes or when the going gets rough, they're gone. And that can lead to a sense of isolation, a sense of frustration. Where were you? You bailed when I needed you. But what I would encourage you to consider is that the Lord still brought them into your life for a season. You still have positive memories of that person, and they still served as a positive role in your life for that time. And consider this a new season.
It's been hard for me to accept that there may be seasons in friendship. I was always kind of the mindset that, friends last forever. But grief changes that. The loss of my husband has changed that. And I have to accept that there are times where there are people who were a part of that life that I lived before with him that aren't going to be a part of my life going forward. And that's another thing to grieve.
There will be new leaves, new people that you encounter that will serve a new purpose in your life. And those people will be there regardless of the circumstances. And they are amazing supports in our life. They don't leave. And we don't have many of those people in our lives. And when those people are there, enjoy them and appreciate them.
In the biblical book of Ecclesiastes, we have a strong endorsement of friends helping friends. Ecclesiastes 4 says, 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up.
Along the way on this grief journey, we find out who has been given the grace to come alongside us in meaningful and helpful ways. These are the relationships we want to lean into as we are trusting the Lord to do a healing work in our lives.
Now, you may be thinking, I don't really have any support around me. Well, you might consider sharing your needs with someone in your grief share group, especially one of your group facilitators. They probably have experienced challenges similar to what you're dealing with right now, and will try to help you find a way forward. Or they might be able to suggest someone else who would be good for you to talk to.
In your participant guide this week, be sure to take the self-evaluation to find out whether you're expecting too much from your comforters. You can also read the important tips on how to deal with insensitive comments and make things easier for yourself and the people who are trying to help. Looking for more help for your journey? Visit griefshare.org to watch bonus videos from both experts and testimonials, as well as helpful articles and additional resources to help you manage your grief.
I just didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know how to see God anymore. And I just questioned, did he really love me? And did I really love him?
Why does God allow it? I don't know. But what does God do with it? I can show you amazing things, story after story after story, of great things that God has done with absolutely horrendous and terrible circumstances.
Thank you for sharing this time with us. We look forward to talking with you next time.